Welcome to another edition of Living with Purpose. Today I have Bill Karidias, who is the founder of Spartan Equipment, a company that produces accessories for farming machinery and is manufactured in the US. And his business and the way he has worked has been showing up with purpose. So I'm looking forward to having a conversation with Bill. So Bill, welcome to Living with Purpose.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to share my journey as a professional and as a human being on this wonderful planet that we both reside on. And hopefully by the end of this conversation, we'll enrich the lives of those listening with some golden nuggets that you and I will share together today.
Perfect. So just share your growing up. Where are you based? What family environment you had? Some interesting moments from your family that were seminal in your development. So let's just start from the time you were born.
So I'd first like to let the listeners know that I am the product of first generation. I am the first generation of Greek immigrants. So both of my parents, my father and my mother, immigrated from Greece. My father was from an island called Chios, and my mother from a smaller island called Leros. And they immigrated here when they were, actually, my father was 18 in 1957. So after the Second World War, which was a very difficult time for my parents, they decided as young adults to emigrate to this country. And believe it or not, they didn't meet in Greece. They actually met here in Baltimore. So there is a Greek community in South Baltimore that's referred to as Greektown. And my parents met through their aunts and uncle, got them together, and they introduced themselves that way. And they ended up marrying 1959. So that was the journey start.
So why did they choose Baltimore? Because Baltimore always had a great community.
The section of Baltimore that I'm describing is called Greektown. Of course, we have Little Italy, like most major metropolitan cities in our country. But my father's older sibling, his sister, had emigrated to this country about 8 or 10 years prior to him coming here, and she established roots in the Baltimore area. So that was the genesis of how he ended up here. And my mom originally came to Detroit, Michigan, where her father was residing for a short time. But then her mom ended up here in Baltimore with my mom's uncle, and my mother ended up coming here to Baltimore because her parents split. So they ended up parting ways, and my mom ended up coming to Baltimore to be with her mother. So that's how they both ended up here.
You know, life is so interesting, right? There are things that you just cannot plan and how these connections that get made. So here you are, a product of two immigrants who met in Baltimore.
Yeah.
But originally from Greece.
Yeah. I lived in Greektown till I was 5 years old. And then my father ended up getting a job at General Motors on Burning Highway, a major manufacturing facility here in Baltimore. It's no longer here, unfortunately, but it was the longest running GM plant until they demolished it and it became an Amazon facility now on Burning Highway. But that plant started, I believe it was in the early 1900s, in the 1920s, actually. So my father, being an uneducated immigrant, landed a dream job. As you can imagine, the story of many immigrants, right? Factories were the job of the day. And they had great benefits, good pay for skilled labor or unskilled labor, however you want to word it. But he ended up landing that job and worked there his entire career. Now, my father was the type of man who, because he landed that job and being a struggling immigrant, knew what he landed. He knew that was his golden ticket to feed his family in this country. With that said, my father worked at that plant for about 30 years when he retired in the early 90s. But in all those years, he was never late, not once. He never missed a day of work. His shift in the morning, when he used to work night shift when he was a young man because he didn't have seniority. But once he got day shift in the early 80s, his shift wouldn't start till 7 a.m., but he would get up at 4 a.m. and he would leave our home in Hamilton by 4:30, quarter of 5 to get to work by 6 a.m. every day, to lay his tools out, to get ready, because he knew he could not afford to lose this job. So I was raised with that mentality, and I understood and I appreciated hard work from that example that my father laid down for me as a young kid. So that instilled in me a work ethic that was pretty much in congruence to some of my American friends, right? Because that mentality from the Europeans that came to this country, especially the ones that were uneducated, and they knew they landed a job that could feed their family for life, they appreciated it much more so than most Native American-born citizens that I saw firsthand didn't appreciate the value as much. Now, that's not to say Americans aren't hardworking people,
Yes.
but you see the point.
Correct. I mean, because that's your only ticket, right? I mean, that's your
Right.
I'm an immigrant. I immigrated here much later, 1981, and under very different circumstances, but yet, this is it. So, are you the only child, or do you have siblings and friends? I don't know, family growing up?
I'm a middle child. I have a younger sister, 4 years my junior, and an older sister. So I was in the middle. But in the Greek culture and the Italian culture, right, the male, at least then, when the culture still kind of held true, you were the prized possession in a sense, right? Because it's a more patriarchal society, at least it still was then. The values were, the son would take predominance in the sibling rivalry, right? So my parents tended to give me advantage or privilege that my sisters were able to have. For example, I started dating when I was 13 years old. My sisters, that would never happen. They couldn't date until they were 18 or even 20 years old. So some of that sibling rivalry caused friction between me and my sisters. So by the time I was 18, okay, this is a crucial point in my life. My senior year in high school, I was training to become a professional athlete from a very young age. I had the natural giftings. I wanted to play in the NFL. That was my goal from age 5. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I had the physical admin and the abilities to possibly make it in the NFL. But I damaged my knees, and it changed the whole trajectory of my life. With that said, my siblings always had kind of a resentment towards me because of how my parents gave me preference. So I had to actually help my parents coach them. By the time I was 18, I had the wherewithal and the knowledge to realize that this is not a good thing. That playing favorites as a parent, that's probably not the best way to go. So I used to tell my parents, look, stop giving me preferential treatment because you're causing issues with my sisters. But let's fast forward to how I came to be who I am in this industry, right? So right out of high school, I went to a college that I had my last year of playing football in because I wanted to get drafted to Pitt to then get into the NFL. But then again, the course of life has, as you know, it has forks in the road, which gives us the ability at times to make decisions where you can choose right or left. Okay, sometimes life gives you that choice. Other times, it's like being in the stream of life, I say, where now you're in the current of life and you have no choice because the current tends to be so strong that now it's making the decisions for you. Case in point, I could not control the fact that I blew my knee out for the 3rd time. See, life took that current. I didn't have a choice, right? It changed the trajectory of what I had chosen in life to do. At that point,
Let me just, you've said something that is very, very important. I just want to kind of reframe it for our listeners so that they actually understand when you get a fork in life
yes,
and how you show up, and when you are part of the stream and how you behave there. They're two completely different reactions that we need to learn to have. There will always be opportunities for choices, and there will always be where you're part of the stream, and you may not control your choices, but you still have the ability to navigate. And I think what you're trying to point out now is that given that stream that you were in, how does navigation take place? So thank you so much for this analogy. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, so at 18, the center of my senior year in high school. I had been up to that point from a freshman on because I looked so much older than I was, right? Because of my physical genetics. I looked like a man who was 25 years old, okay? And when I was in high school, they used to call me the man amongst boys, right? That's how I got to play varsity football as a freshman. Okay, so I was the quintessential partying, woman chasing kind of guy in high school up until my senior year. By the time I was a senior, I had already hit kind of a low note, primarily because of my abuse of alcohol. And by then I had realized I had developed a problem with alcohol by my senior year in high school. And on January 26th of 1984, I made a life-change decision. I was at the fork of the road and I had to make a choice because I knew my life, the way it was heading, was not going to last very long. I knew I would perish the earth as a very young human being if I didn't change something dramatically. So a friend of mine who I grew up with from age 5, he had 14 children in his family. They were called the Weinholts, and they took me in. I became the 15th Weinholt. They had 9 boys and 5 girls, but I was much closer to that family than to my very own. And my friend Jerry, who I was closest to than any other human being on the earth, he had made a religious commitment and began to walk the Christian faith. And he began to work on me for a couple years. And I kept saying to him, look, man, go find someone else to preach the gospel to because I'm Greek Orthodox. I am a Christian, right? So I'm raised that way in the traditional form of religion. Well, on January 26th of 84, he confronted, I went to him knowing that I needed something deeper. And I made a commitment to follow this man, Jesus, right? And that changed the whole trajectory of my life. It really did. It was a dramatic conversion, so much so that I was invited by a school administrator in Harford County when I was just out of high school. And I was giving my testimony on high school platforms to hundreds and hundreds of other teenage kids right out of high school myself, giving my story, trying to coach young people to make good decisions in life, right? So that is how my life changed dramatically. So I went to a Bible college in upstate New York for a short time, thinking my life's journey would be in the ministry.
Right.
But it changed again. I ended up coming back to Baltimore, and then I was in construction, doing construction work throughout my career in high school to pay for my tuition at Curly because my father couldn't afford to pay that tuition. So I said, look, I'll work in the summertime. So I did concrete work with the Italians down in Baltimore. And I used to make good money working physically hard during the summertime to pay my way through high school because I wanted a better private education. So let's fast forward out of high school. My career as an NFL potential star was over. I'm not into construction work. Then I landed my first sales job at MCI Telecommunication, which back then in the mid-'80s was breaking up, mobbed up, which was AT&T. And if you remember that, a lot of people don't, but that's how I got my feet wet in sales. So I went in the mid to end of the 80s, back in sales, into construction. I was flailing. I didn't know exactly where I would land. And my father had a dream in the late 80s that he confronted. And when my father would have these dreams, you would listen because it seemed like the cosmos would talk to him through dreams. And he said, son, I had a dream about you last night. I'm like, yeah, okay, like what? He said, I don't know. You were in a dress shirt, but you were in jeans and you had work boots on and you were in sales, but you were in construction. I don't know what it meant. And I was like, okay, I didn't put much credence to it at the time. Well, in May of 1989, I landed my first job in the construction equipment space, working for Ditch Witch, selling trencher and surface launch flooring equipment. Our attire as Ditch Witch sales in the 80s and the 90s was you wore a press shirt, button-down collar shirt with jeans and cowboy work boots. That's how we dressed all across the country. So it was a couple years after I had been at Ditch Witch, my father recalled that dream. He said, you remember that dream I had years ago? I'm like, no, what dream? I forgot. He said, you remember the dream where I saw you on job sites? But yet you were in sales and you were dressed kind of clean and it hit me. Wow. The light bulb went off in my head because even then I was struggling do I really want to stay in this industry? And I don't know what it did, but it changed my mind's thinking. And you know what? This maybe is my course. Because I said, my father has dreams and when he has those type of dreams. So it was a recall years later the dream was a prophetic foreshadowing of where I ended up. So that was an amazing transition. So now we fast forward to 1997 after being in the industry for about 8 years, and I decided to start my own company. And I did. In March of 97, I started my own company selling compact construction equipment. And by 2012 is when I decided to create my own brand, which is Spartan Equipment. And what we do specifically is sell the implements, as you said, or the accessories, or what goes on the front of what most common folk would refer to as a bobcat loader. We call them skid steer loader. So that was the journey of how I melees through life up to this point. But I have to share this next piece with you because it was life-changing again. I had another fork in the road. After 40 years of being a stalwart defender and a true apologist for the Christian faith, I really dug into what most people call the Holy Scriptures, the Word of God. There's many words that it goes by. I was a stalwart. I was not your average believer. I was the one who dug into the text very deeply, verse by verse, precept upon precept, right? Chapter by chapter, from Genesis to Revelation, and I was a stalwart apologist for the faith. I led many people to faith in Christ, including most of my family members and others, for 40 years. This was my life commitment. Every decision that I made, professionally and personally, was guided by my faith principles that I had learned through the Scripture. Next, about 3 years ago, I started looking at everything I believed, and I started deconstructing everything brick by brick. And I'm going to fast forward because it would be a long journey. We don't have enough time to share with you, but I will say this. Now, I have completely deconstructed for my religious faith, for my Christianity. And it put shockwaves through my family, my friend, my business, because they knew the stalwart of the faith and how I was the spiritual leader in my family. Right? And now I had completely deconstructed, and I'm in another space that now it's like a complete life reset. Just as dramatic as my life changed on January 26 in 1984 when I made my profession of faith in Christ and to follow him, now deconstructing, it's just as dramatic. So I'm reevaluating every brick in my life. My foundation has been kind of shaken, but in a good way. But again, in a way that causes me to shift my entire life course and where I set my foundation on that. So that was probably the most dramatic shift in the last 3 years in my journey as a business owner and as a human being.
So, a couple of questions. What happened to your friend Joey?
Jerry? Okay, so he actually deconstructed many years ago prior to me, and now he's in Boulder, Colorado, and he started a journey where he has the most popular yoga studios. He's a guru, and he's very well known in the Boulder area, he and his wife, as they have a following where he's gone towards more of the Eastern mystics. And he shifted completely from his Christian worldview to more of an Eastern mystic, but not completely. And again, he would have to speak for his own journey. But we kind of parted ways back in the mid-2000s when he left geographically the Baltimore metro area and decided to make his new life in Colorado. He's still a phenomenal guy. He's got a YouTube channel, and he has, again, he's a very impactful guy. Like myself, we have that charismatic gift where we affect every human being that we touch because it's a gift. I don't know, the cosmos gave it to us. We have the ability to influence other human beings. And of course, it's a choice to influence for good or for evil or to manipulate those when you have that type of gift, or to be a giver and to not use this gift in a manipulative way, but in a way that helps enrich the lives of those around you. And I'm constantly being challenged on that. You know, as a sales professional, you have to decide every day, are you going to make choices that better serve your client or yourself?
So your deconstruction, what is that leading you to? Are you ready to tell, or is there something that's still working?
Yeah, no. So I'm still hammering it out. And I'll tell you exactly where I am. And I have a term that I've come up with to try to explain, because so many of my family, friends, and associates are so shocked that I had to come up with something. But I will say this, for the first year or so, as you can maybe imagine, I was in a severe existential crisis.
Right.
When you go through what I went through, and I'm a guy who takes this stuff very seriously. I don't take it I'm not a casual Christian. I'm not what you call a C&E Christian. Christmas and Easter, right? It was every day of my life. Every decision was filtered through that lens. Okay, so now I had to decide, okay, where's my orientation? Okay, and I'm still trying to figure it out. But here's what I will say to you today. How would you describe where you're at? I am an optimistic agnostic. And some people said, what does that mean? Okay, well, let me explain. Here's what I'm going to say. If you're going to ask me what happens to what some people call the soul or the spirit, if that exists, right? My answer to you is, I don't know. But as an optimistic agnostic, I'm hopeful that if my consciousness does exist in another realm once our physical body takes the dirt nap, I'm hopeful that something else is after this existence to give me some solace and some purpose, that there is a reason in being. And that is the best way I can answer right now where I'm at. I'm still hammering it out.
So talking about purpose, right? So here you are, now in another interesting folk, and you've not entered the stream yet. And purpose is what you are really now focused on. So talk a little bit about the importance of purpose, how that has helped you through your journey up to now, and then talk a little bit about how you think purpose shows up. Talk a little bit about, where you are in this journey. Even with your faith, you were driven by purpose.
Yeah.
I think something happened to you in high school once you decided that you were not going down that path of alcoholism. Something flipped. So I want you to just reflect on the importance of purpose, and then we come to that one golden nugget.
Okay, so up until I had my deconstruction, my purpose was very focused, okay? You have two approaches in life when you're going to make a decision or choose a path or drive in any direction, okay? You can use the shotgun approach, right? Where you blast the shotgun and it scatters. Or you can use a 30-06 and you can use the rifle approach, which is very focused, right? Now you're using a rifle, not a shotgun. Okay, my life was a rifle approach. Very succinctly, I knew what my journey was and what my mission was. It was to glorify the creator of this universe and everything in it that can be seen, observed, and that our five senses have the ability to experience. That was my focus for 40 years. To lead others by example, and yes, through the words that I could communicate to another human soul in the listening of my voice in their ear about what I thought truth was and what I thought the purpose of why every human sentient being was created, to glorify this creator of this universe. That was my focus. And the business was to feed my family. Okay, so that was the twofold. So I had the drive and the purpose to create a company to feed my family and to succeed monetarily so that I could also be charitable and give of the fruits of my labors for this mission and purpose as well. But now that has changed. So to say that I know exactly, I would not be completely forthright if I said to you, you get it, right? Okay, so now that was my journey. I was so focused. Now what's my journey? And to be honest with you, I haven't figured it all out. And I get up every morning, because I am a driven person and I have goals. It's more day by day now. It's not looking so much into the eternal. I'm living more in the present. That's the best way I can explain it to you and to the listeners. I'm not getting ahead of myself. I get up, I think about today, I try to learn from yesterday, but I try not to let tomorrow bring anxiety, right, to me. So I live more in the present, and that's kind of my purpose journey to affect those around me in the present each day.
This is wonderful. So now let's end with your one golden nugget. And again, I want our listeners to kind of get that not every single moment in your life you will have a clarity of purpose. There will always be opportunities where it will evolve, and I think Bill has highlighted this thing of purpose gives you focus. And I think that is actually a very important lesson to take. So, the one golden nugget, sir.
What I've been working on in my mind and the exercise that I've been putting myself through now for the last year or so is now that the support system, I will put it that way, that I relied on for the last 40 years that gave me solace that when my body expires, that I had the eternal promise that my soul would go on and it would live emphatically. When the brain is trained that way for 40 years, right, it gives you the ability to survive psychologically each day. Otherwise, fear takes over. When fear takes over, it's paralyzing. And then you have panic attack disorder. Then you have the ability to not make decisions anymore because you're living in fear, and the mind cannot function that way. The cortisol level goes up in your blood. You can't function. Okay, so now that worldview has changed, I don't know what's coming after I perish definitively in my mind. Here's the gold nugget now that I'm working on, and I'm working it through, and that is to expunge the mind, ultimately, of the fear of the unknown. Okay, so what does that mean? The gold nugget is try to train yourself to not live in fear. That means fear of tomorrow, fear of death, fear of losing a relationship, fear of losing your son or daughter in a horrific accident. Why? Because we have no control over these things anyway. So you might as well train yourself to be a realist and to expunge fear and not let fear be your guiding or motivating force. And it's very hard to do. I've trained many people over the years who suffer with panic attack disorder, because I suffered that in my 20s, and I learned to overcome it through the exercise of the mind to diminish and expunge and extinguish the fears that are at the root cause, I believe, of every panic attack. Every panic attack in its root, in my opinion, is ultimately the fear of death. That's where panic attack disorder is the foundation and the start.
I love this thing of expunge the fear.
Yeah.
To live a life of purpose is to expunge fear from your mind.
There it is.
Then it's been such a wonderful, it's been a total delight. I'm so glad we had this conversation. Thank you so very much again to our listeners. Purpose is this renewable source of energy that continues to drive humanity forward.
Yeah.
Once your fear, you will get life where you have to decide on going down a fork, and there are times where you will be with a stream. How you make decisions without fear is going to be the most important thing that you will take from this podcast. Ben, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share with everyone listening, and hope that the world today would be a little bit of a better place, and that some people listening might have the ability to think through their fears and overcome them for the betterment of their lives, and to help everyone that their lives touch to do the same.
Ben, thank you so very much for being with us.